Lex Luthor, Superman's arch-nemesis, is without a doubt one of the most iconic comic book supervillains. The character has appeared in countless comics ever since 1940, and as a result there is obviously a multitude of great Luthor stories out there. But which ones are the very best? Well, that's not really up to me or anyone else to say, but what I can do is present my very own favorite Luthor tales, and that is what I'm going to do. Feel free to do so yourself in the comments down below. Number 5. Dark Victory. No, not that Dark Victory. No, not that Dark Victory either. This Dark Victory, from the 4-issue miniseries Superman's Nemesis, Lex Luthor, an obvious play on such titles like Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, and Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. This miniseries was published in 1999 and was written by David Michelinie and penciled by Val Semeiks. So in this series, Lex Luthor meets a new arch-nemesis, one who's even more annoying than the Man of Steel, rival businessman and philanthropist Charisma. With good deeds and a lot of charisma, this newcomer Charisma takes Metropolis by storm, eclipsing even Superman himself in popularity. At the same time, Lex's life begins to suffer, both on a personal front and in the workplace. Eventually, he even finds himself accused of crimes and kicked out of his own company. It becomes obvious that someone is willfully making all this happen, and that someone can be no one else but this mysterious newcomer, Charisma. But how and why? And what is Lex going to do about it, now that he's all on his own and all out of funds? For some reason, nobody seems to remember this miniseries. I've never heard anyone ever talk about it, and I haven't seen it appear on a single Best of Luthor list. So I guess mine's the first. I have no idea why this series has been so forgotten. It's actually of historical value, as it was the very first series to feature Luthor as the main character. It's a great story too. It's fascinating to see the powerful Lex Luthor fall so hard. It's equally fascinating to see him handle the situation. This is one time he's really forced to struggle. He's got no money, no armies of goons, no giant robots, and no flying warsuits. Just his intellect and his willpower. And it's great too to for once see him face off against someone else besides Superman. A terrific Luthor story and a must-read for any true Lex fan. Number 4. The Einstein Connection, from Superman 416, published in 1986. It was written by Elliot S. Maggin and penciled by Superman mainstay Kurt Swan. Now this one is a classic that always shows up on Luthor lists and in Luthor collections. It seems to be a story that's loved by all Luthor fans, and I'm no exception. It's one of the last Lex Luthor stories of the pre-crisis era. In other words, it's one of the last comics to feature the classic mad scientist version of Lex, before the modern businessman version was introduced. I actually kinda like this classic version better, as it's simply more fun. I prefer a Lex with a colorful outfit, ray guns, robots, and other sci-fi devices. Anyway, so in this story it's revealed that for years, Lex has always escaped prison on the 14th of March, and every single time he spent that day doing something rather bizarre. Like for example going to a very specific ice cream parlor to have a very specific flavor of ice cream, or pretending to work at a patent office in a small European town. Superman eventually noticed this weird pattern, but at first has no clue what the hell it's about. Must be something sinister, right? Well no, for once it actually isn't anything sinister at all. The 14th of March is the birthday of Albert Einstein, Lex's greatest hero and idol, and his bizarre activities on that date turn out to be reenactments of Einstein's life. He's simply paying tribute to his idol on his birthday. I love stories where the big villain is completely broken, like in the previous entry. And I also love stories where we see the big villain on his day off, so to speak, like in this one. After all, Lex isn't always pulling off some evil master crime. Sometimes he's just doing something harmless in his spare time. Both of these types of stories helps to humanize the villain, make him more real and less of a stereotypical evil cardboard cutout. Lex may be a supervillain, but he's also a human being. Number 3. Lex Luthor, The Unauthorized Biography, a one-shot graphic novel published in 1989. It was written by James D. Hudnall and penciled by Eduardo Barreto. This was the first comic to supply the modern businessman Lex Luthor with an origin story. We discover this origin as a washed-up alcoholic writer decides, out of desperation for cash, to do an unauthorized biography on Luthor and sell it to a publishing company. This writer, named Peter Sands, thus begins to dig deep into Luthor's past, interviewing people who knew him before he was the richest man in Metropolis. Along the way, Sands uncovers some rather dirty secrets pertaining to Luthor's mysterious rise to power. Turns out Lex is nowhere near as clean as the public believes, and his empire is in fact built on murder, blackmail, and bribery. Naturally, this is something he wants to keep secret, so it goes without saying that Sands' life is soon in grave danger. I absolutely love this comic, one of the greatest graphic novels DC has ever put out. It's an awesome, gritty noir tale, grounded in reality, as opposed to most Superman stories. It has the same tone and style of Batman Year One, and is in fact one of few DC stories that feels like it takes place in the same universe as Year One. So yeah, if you like Year One, you'll like this one too. As for its portrayal of Luthor, it's in stark contrast with the previous two entries. While they both humanized Lex, this is perhaps the scariest portrayal of Lex we've ever seen. This is a man who's got eyes and ears everywhere. A man who basically controls all of Metropolis, and no one is capable of doing anything about it. The ones foolish enough to try are swiftly dealt with. This Lex is merciless, stooping at nothing to get what he wants, and he always gets what he wants. In true film noir fashion, there is no happy ending here. There is only the eternal shadow of Lex Luthor, cast over the city of Metropolis. Number 2. Lex Luthor, Man of Steel, a 5-issue miniseries published in 2005. It was written by Brian Azzarello and penciled by Lee Bermejo. This was the second series to star the character, but unlike the first series, this one is certainly not forgotten. It is in fact generally regarded as the definitive Lex Luthor story. I might actually agree with that, at least when it comes to the modern Luthor. So, what it's about is essentially just a plot by Luthor to disgrace Superman and turn the city against him. Kinda simple actually when you think about it. Luthor's scheme to accomplish this though is not exactly simple. It's complicated, brilliant, and utterly despicable. The true focus here isn't necessarily on a plot though. It's really a tale about Luthor's perception of Superman. Luthor's hatred of Superman is the real point of this comic. Why he hates Superman so much. In the old classic comics, his motivation for hating Superman was actually pretty weak. So here, Brian Azzarello tried to make Luthor's hatred make more sense, and in the process turn Lex into an incredibly layered and complex character. Lex views Superman as a dangerous alien, an all-powerful entity that could, if he so wished, destroy all of humanity. Unlike everyone else, Lex sees no reason to trust Superman. After all, why should he? No one truly knows anything about this being after all. Who's to say he won't someday turn on us, and then we'd be completely powerless to stop him? Lex also feels that Superman's ever-helping godlike hand keeps us down, makes humanity lazy and dependent. With a flying god around, we stop aspiring to become gods ourselves. And that is Luthor's worst nightmare, for humanity to stop reaching for the skies, stop striving for greatness. That is why he hates Superman, and why Superman simply has to go. So this Lex actually greatly cares for humanity. All that he does, heinous as it may be, is in the best interest of humanity, or so he himself reasons. This story is so well written though that in many parts we actually agree with him. Every villain has his motivations and reasons that make sense to him, and this comic is one of the best pieces of media to portray that. Never before or after have we understood Lex Luthor better than in this story. As great as it may be though, it isn't my personal favorite Luthor story, because that is... Number 1. Luthor's Last Stand, Luthor Fights for Good, Luthor's Day of Reckoning, from Action Comics 510 to 512, published in 1980. This three-parter was written by Cary Bates and penciled by Curt Swan. Another classic pre-crisis story featuring the mad scientist supervillain Lex. In this one, Lex becomes obsessed with a woman that Superman saves during one of their battles. Her name is Angela Blake, and the obsessed Luthor basically begins to stalk her. While doing so, he discovers that Angela is dying from a terminal illness. He thus decides to use his brilliant mind to find a cure for her. And so he does. The two then fall in love, and with the love of this good woman, Lex begins to change. He realizes how petty his reasons for hating Superman really are, and so finally decides to end their pointless, destructive war. He also decides to leave his life of crime behind him and reform. In fact, he will not only reform, but actively fight crime too. Lex Luthor, the greatest criminal genius the world has ever seen, becomes a valiant crime fighter. But that's not all. He also begins to use his scientific genius for the betterment of mankind, as opposed to the detriment of mankind. For example, he repairs the ozone layer and disarms the entire world of nuclear weapons. With Luthor now being a good guy, he's also free to resume his old friendship with Superman. The two were originally friends after all, back in Smallville. And when it's time for Lex to marry Angela, guess who's the best man? Yeah, it's all pretty damn shocking. I'm not going to spoil any more though, as you simply must read this comic yourself. It is, in my opinion, not only the best pre-crisis Luthor story, but the best Luthor story period, and also one of the very best comics in general. It's what you call a real page-turner, as you simply must find out what the hell's going on here. How is this going to end? It's also the greatest example of Luthor's tragic waste of his brilliant mind, when this is how things could and really should be. Lex shouldn't be a supervillain and Superman's greatest nemesis. He should be mankind's greatest savior and Superman's best bud. You really get the feeling Cary Bates wrote this as the be-all end-all of Luthor stories. And for me, it kind of is, at least where the classic Luthor is concerned. And there you have it. The 5 greatest Lex Luthor stories, in my opinion. Tell me yours in the comments. Now, I know I've said in the past that I'm not the biggest fan of Lex, and I'm sure some people have chosen to interpret that as me saying I hate Lex. I obviously don't. He isn't my favorite Superman villain though. However, while making this video, I think I've grown to like him a bit more, especially the classic pre-crisis version. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.